morning, everyone. Welcome to Connect. What an awesome, awesome view from up here. I wish you could see it. It's a sea of faces. And I wanted to talk today about a very important topic that we saw Greg and then Ross introduce, the very fundamental nature of digital transformation. And specifically, digital transformation happens usually when there's pressure, when there's real existential pressure to change, when it's digitally transform or die. And I wanted to try to bring that to life for you on stage here, as we do every year, through some demos. Now, as usual, I spent about a year thinking about these things in advance, and I try to draw inspiration from real life, from what we see around us, from what I feel. This particular one stems from our annual San Francisco rafting trip. And I remember when we announced this, sitting there and saying, you know, I'm going to have to get a tent, I'm going to have to get some lanterns, I'm going to have to get some equipment, and I'm a real gearhead, so I have to make sure I buy the right stuff, and how am I going to do that, and I don't go camping very often, and so on. And that experience, or rather that poor experience, is what gave rise to this. So today I want to talk to you, focus on a particular industry, which is retail. And if you want to talk about a poster child for an industry facing disruption, that's surely retail, right? Retail is really facing an existential crisis. And a lot of retailers are no longer with us because they couldn't actually evolve and they couldn't meet the needs. And obviously, the big elephant in the room is Amazon, right? Amazon has kind of paved the way and shown people what retail can be, and anybody who can't compete with that is really left by the wayside. Now, there's lots of challenges that face retail today, but I wanted to focus on 4 today. The first one is legacy technology. It really goes to the core of what Greg and Ross were saying, is there an ability to actually change and evolve and compete when you've got all of this legacy technology right there? And when you walk into a retail very often, it's clear that technology is not the first thing they've thought about for the last 20 years. There's underinvestment, there's a lot of over-outsourcing, so that's the first issue. The second one is breadth and scale. How are you going to compete with the everything store? How are you, as a retailer, focusing on one particular area, going to be able to compete with someone who seems to have everything else covered? The third area is, how do you really know your customer, right? What do you actually know about the person walking into your store? What do you know about the person going to your website, right? You don't have all of that Alexa data. You don't know all of their shopping history across all the categories and what books they read and all of that information. How are you going to compete with that? And the fourth one is really about bricks and mortars. Most retailers have a huge investment in brick and mortar, and the question is whether that's an anchor around their ankles or whether that's an asset that they can actually leverage. And we're going to try to tackle all 4 of those today. There are plenty of others, of course. So let's start with the ability to innovate. And as Ross talked about, as Greg mentioned, the ability to innovate at the edge where you're facing your customers is completely tied to your ability to innovate at the core. After all, you can make whatever promises you want to your customers, but unless you can fulfill them, you won't actually move the needle on your business. And when your core is all cemented together and brittle and legacy, how are you actually going to meet that challenge? Well, let's take it step by step. Let's start with looking at whatever systems you have right now, and as Greg was saying, carving out some explicit, important building blocks for your enterprise. The first one is probably your digital catalog, right? The catalog isn't just a web page, the catalog isn't just a database. The catalog is the thing that describes your core assets, which are your products that you sell to your consumers. So regardless of how you actually ended up implementing that catalog, you can still regard it as a shiny new thing by thinking about reimagining the API to that digital catalog. And that's one of the most important things that APIs do. Ross mentioned 3, I'll add a 4th. They abstract away the experience of anybody consuming that, in this case catalog, from all of the stuff that happens under the covers to actually fulfill that consumption. And that abstraction, that separation, is what allows you to actually fight complexity, which otherwise would be overwhelming when you have layers and layers of systems. So that API as an abstraction layer is extremely important. Let's actually start with that. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to start with some consumer-first thinking. And the way I'll do that is I'll actually create an API for you right here. So this is our platform. And I'll go ahead and show you how easy it is to actually imagine an API. And remember, I'm not thinking right now, how did I implement my API? Where's the data coming from? I'm simply thinking about what would be the best experience to give to anybody who wants to consume my digital catalog. And so when I do that, I go and create an API specification. I'll call it catalog 1. And I'll go ahead and click here and start out really with a blank canvas. Now, many of you will be starting out with already a bunch of requirements, but let me show you how easy this is. So what I do here is I start to say, what would a consumer want? Perhaps they would want to get some products. And so as I do that, I ask myself, what is it that they'd actually like to do? Maybe they'd like to get a set of products. Maybe they'd like to create a new product. Now remember, this isn't the end consumer. This is anybody consuming your catalog service. And as I do this, the documentation actually starts to build here. And as I add more and more capabilities to this, I see exactly what the consumption experience is going to be. And I haven't implemented anything. I'm simply defining what is the consumption experience going to be like. Now that's great, but over time, as I build more and more structure into this thing, I'm going to start creating reusable components. I'm going to start describing what should a product actually look like, what field should it have in it, how should I get through a list of products, what is the mechanism for deleting something in a collection, and so on and so forth, right? And so as I do that, I start to create a bunch of reusable assets. And so here I show you our Anypoint Exchange product, which has inside of it a list of reusable fragments that I created in the process of creating my first 1 or 2 or 3 APIs. And some of you will have a Center for Enablement, a central team that will create some of the reusable patterns, the best practices. Others will actually create them organically, and let's just factor them out and put them somewhere where you and others can go and consume them. And so in the end, when I have a few of those, the API itself continues to look remarkably simple, but it's actually very, very rich. Let's actually look at it a little bit. So here's a way to get products, get information about a particular product, maybe by type. If I go and get information about a particular product, you can see all the information that's actually available for me. Here's what a product ends up looking like. Here's some examples that are inside of there. Tremendously rich information, and yet the API spec is relatively simple, as it should be. Right? Because API specs are supposed to be the simple building blocks that you compose everything else out of. And that's really the power of design-first thinking. You don't start by being saddled with all of the baggage that you have. You start from thinking about what should the future actually look like. OK, that's great. The next piece that we probably want to carve out, and again, we're thinking about consumers. The next piece is probably something around inventory. Because what good is a product if you can't actually get it? And so let's apply exactly the same thinking to your digital inventory. Again, carve out a piece of that API, and let's see what that ends up looking like. Well, this one is a lot simpler. It's a lot simpler because we can reuse all the pieces that we had before. It's the same kind of pattern. You're going to add something. You're going to delete something. The examples are different. The data types are different. But the end result is a very simple design-first approach. Here's a way to actually get an inventory item. We see all the information about that inventory item here. And the next person who designs an API, the more you do it, the easier it actually becomes, because you can just reference the patterns that happened before. Now again, I haven't implemented anything, but I know exactly what success looks like. I know what the end state should actually be. OK, so with that in mind, I've got a few building blocks. And having those building blocks is what allows me to actually think about the next step. So in terms of the next step, I can start to say, you know, as I'm building new products, I don't have to talk, or new APIs, I don't have to talk about those again. I don't have to run those implementations again. I can think of what it is that I need to do with those. So the kinds of things that I can do with them are to start to think outside in, right? Start to think about the end consumer and start to ask myself, what does a consumer want these days? A consumer these days isn't necessarily interested in going into a store immediately. They might be sitting at a cafe, planning their camping trip, figuring out, you know, what tent should I be doing? What are other people buying? Well, you have to think that way in order to design the flexibility into your system that will let you give these kinds of consumer experiences. So to that end, you can do something like this. Now, this is a picture from Record Day, from a record store in Berkeley, that decided that they were going to do self-serve the old-fashioned way. This is actually great, right? If you have no idea how to buy a record player, you go in there, you go through a whole decision flow, and you come out with just the right record player. Now, of course, we can do a little bit better than that electronically. Now, let's see what that looks like. So, the first thing is we need a way to actually find products. And to that extent, let's go ahead and design a product finder API. Again, it becomes relatively simple. You see this with just a few lines. We have all the capabilities necessary to actually find products. And then we need to say, where are we going to get that information from? Well, it turns out that I already have an API that somebody else built that tells me about the various store locations and the warehouses. Now, this particular one happens to be spec'd out with a different language, OpenAPI spec. It's a very ubiquitous language for defining APIs. And Mark will be talking more tomorrow about our native support that is coming out now for OpenAPI spec across our platform. And so while you can model with RAML, you can also consume OpenAPI specs. Here's a particular OpenAPI spec. And once you actually see this in Exchange, you don't care anymore where it came from. You don't care if it was modeled this way or if it was generated from code. You can consume it in exactly the same way. When you consume it inside of Studio, inside of Mule, we automatically build out for you all the pieces necessary to actually connect it to your backend systems to implement your logic. And when you do that, you end up with a few more pieces inside your Mule application. And now you've got a fully functional product API. You don't believe me? Let's actually play with it. So here's our product API. I can get a list of products, and I'm going to go ahead and try it. Now, we're a secure company, so I'm going to put in HTTPS here. And when you send that query in, this is live running on CloudHub. Hopefully, you get back some products. Let's see if this works. Great. Here it is. Whole bunch of information about the products that are available. And this API was built with a lot of flexibility in mind, without all of the restrictions that you normally would encounter in such APIs. All right, awesome. So now we've got a few building blocks, but consumers these days expect more, because what do you do with that flexibility? So, you know, it's interesting. I would have thought, well, you just go online and you shop for things and now everything is good. But for 50,000 years, we've been evolving to talk to each other. Now, our kids may have forgotten this, but we're actually pretty good at interacting with people. So wouldn't we like to actually give an experience where you're actually talking to somebody and managing your product discovery, managing perhaps your orders, the stuff that you've already ordered? So how can we create that kind of experience on top of what we built so far? Let's take a look. So in this case, we actually need to pull in a few more things, right? If you're going to manage your orders, you better make your order management also composable building blocks. So let's see how that works. So in this case, the e-commerce system that was chosen is SAP Hybris. And SAP Hybris actually has a really good API approach. So they list out all of their APIs here. You can get quick access to them. Each one of them has a console already associated with it. It's very consumable. It's very friendly. And the reason they got that way is because they actually used repeatable patterns in order to go and construct their APIs. So they know that their APIs are very consistent because they actually publish out the patterns that they use for those APIs. And they let you reuse them as well, so your APIs become very consistent as well. Here's a list of some of those patterns. And here is the ordering API that we actually constructed to take information from that and customize some special sauce. Because we wanted to make it even more flexible so that when we have an agent interacting with our order management system, all those capabilities are available in much easier ways. And that's another pattern you should be applying, is use these APIs to actually build in more flexibility into your systems. Okay. Here's the actual implementation of that order change process. What you see is this is really very approachable stuff. It's not that hard to actually get done. Okay, and with that in mind, we now have the ability to do order management, but we haven't yet introduced the notion of the agents. So where are we going to get that? Well, the place we're going to get that is from a completely different place. In this case, we've chosen Google's Dialogflow. The Dialogflow gives you a very approachable system for managing bots, online bots. And let's see actually what that looks like. So here's the dialog flow system. And in that dialog flow system, you can define various intents. You basically say, well, how do I tell that somebody is looking to find a product? How do I tell that somebody is looking to buy a product or to change their orders and so on? And we've gone ahead and defined some of these intents in here. If you actually see some of these, if you click into them, you can see that we give some patterns for the machine learning to start to extract information from what the consumer is actually saying and turn that into structured information that we can then pass to the API to do various things. And that's really the glue between the natural language interaction that a human would have with a bot and the back-end systems that expect very well-defined structure. Okay, so let's see how this actually works. Okay, so here I have my on-purpose unstyled chat window, just to show exactly what's going on. And I'm in the market for a tent, so let's see how I talk to this bot. So I've got my chat window down here, and I'm going to type something in. Hi, I want to change my order, and send that to the bot. The bot receives that, and because the bot understands my past order history, this is something that the bot can recommend to me. I see my previously purchased items, and I can choose the right one in a natural way. Hit send again. And the bot understands to show me more order details. Now here I can actually engage in changing the information that I'm seeing on the screen. Again, in a very intuitive way. And the bot's able to extract that data out of the payload, apply it in context, check in this case the shipping status, and actually show me on screen what's changed, in this case a quantity of 2. So is that okay? Yes. And so the bot is saying, great, it realizes that I now have a credit, and the merchandising system says, well, given a credit, here's more stuff that I think you might be interested in, whose prices actually fit within that potential budget window. And so is this interesting to me? I'd say that the answer is yes. And again, I'm giving it something in the context of our discussion. And the response to that is, well, more merchandising. Again, this was programmed in, that there's another opportunity to upsell me. Of course, at some point it becomes too much, and that's where the merchandising people have to tune the algorithm. Let's say that this is still reasonable. And so I choose to actually get the second one, and the bot knows how to talk to me in a reasonable way. In this case, confirming the charging in the same credit card. And when I go ahead and confirm that, then the bot is able to talk to me about next steps, close off the conversation. I end it on my side as well, and we're done. Now that we've got this experience built up, let's go back for a moment and actually see what we've built. So we started with designing the catalog API, right? And then later we would worry about actually attaching it to the catalog system. And we did exactly the same thing for the inventory API, and we did the same thing for the locations API. That one actually was generated. Then we attached them back to the systems off of the inventory system, the official one. And then we actually designed a product finder and built that on top of the existing building blocks, right? So it was pretty quick to go and implement. And then we pulled in an e-commerce system, and then we exposed an order API off of that. That was a little bit more flexible, and we created an order management system as well. And on top of that, we then put in some merchandising smarts to tell us what products to actually merchandise. Now, usually you would create this in the context of some other projects, right? So as Greg and Ross were saying, this stuff is generated naturally in the course of doing business. You might have created it for your mobile application, and then we can repurpose those same building blocks for the chat application and connect that to the various agents, right? So we're really reusing the same pieces in order to deliver new experiences. Okay, now, this is interesting because this, without all the labels, is just a graph. In a computer science sense, this is a graph, right? A graph is anything with nodes and lines and special relationships and meanings between those lines. So there's lots of examples of graphs out there, right? The internet itself is a graph. The power grid is a graph, right? We know about the social graph. In fact, let me concentrate on social networks. In social networks, there's very well-defined nodes in that graph, right? There's people, and there are postings, and there are topics that they like, and there's relationships between them. One person is a friend of another person, and that semantic information, the knowing of exactly what's going on in there, is exactly what allows companies like Facebook to make a tremendous amount of money off of this and to move extremely fast because they truly, deeply understand what is going on inside of that graph. They understand the semantics. We're going to hear a little bit more about semantics and the semantic web from Tim Berners-Lee tomorrow. So we should also be applying that to the application network. And that's what we call the topograph. Topograph, from topo and graph, defines the connectivity of all your applications. And it, too, has very detailed information, right? You should be able to know that this application depends on this application, which exposes this API, which is described by this API spec, which has data types inside of it, and has this policy applied to it, and is running in this environment with the following load, and so on and so forth. All that detailed information is information that you should be able to leverage, and we'll see a little bit more of that as we go down. Okay, so application networks in the topograph. Let's start to see some of these applications. If you look at these productized APIs, we have API specs that describe them, just like the ones that I showed you. And those capture the information about that interface, about that surface area. But in fact, the API itself is a graph. It's a subgraph of the big one, and it tells you exactly what resources and what methods and what payloads and what headers and all of that information about how you interact with that system. And so instead of seeing just all of the landscape of API documents, as if it's some document management system, we should really see it as a distributed graph and be able to ask that distributed graph and start to see patterns inside of it, like all these APIs that you see here are actually consistent. They're all using exactly the same pattern, right? So you can tell in this case it's the paging pattern, which means that when you build a client for those APIs, you can use the same paging logic to get through all of that data. And that consistency is what gives you the kind of speed, the efficiency, the decoupling that we're looking for. So you can ask the graph, and we have very large customers today using this to ask, how consistent are my APIs? That's hard to do when you've got hundreds and thousands of APIs, but you can do that once you have a graph that represents all this data. Now, the good thing is you can concentrate on other problems when you can move that fast, because you do have other problems as a retailer, right? So you're facing Amazon on the right there, and you've got your few legacy monolithic systems, and the question is, how are you going to overcome that scale when that company can move so fast? Well, we know that the answer is going to be that you need to break up those monoliths into smaller pieces. And when you've broken them into smaller pieces, without getting rid of the legacy, but just extracting those APIs, then something magical can start to happen. Because all of your pieces can merge together with other pieces from other retailers, and they can come together organically to match and even overcome the scale that Amazon can give you. How is that actually possible? How, when you become composable, can this army emerge out? Well, let's actually look at it. We've got some signs already on how this can be. Okay, we're going to avoid this for a moment and go back to Google and do a search. And when you do that search, it's kind of amazing what comes out, because the stuff at the top is not web pages. The stuff at the top is actual structured data about camping tents. They're already doing this. They're already pulling all of this stuff together. And there's very interesting things here. How do they know that this offers free shipping? If you click here, you start to see an amazing experience. This is not products sold by Google. These are a variety of products from a variety of retailers that have been brought together emergently to actually offer a wonderful shopping experience with all sorts of metadata. Where's that metadata coming from? How do you expose all that data to allow someone like Google to pull you together into a very large capability? And so to do that, Google, of course, exposes some APIs in order for you to be able to pump your data to them, right? So let's actually look at some of those. Here's the API reference for them. It's a very straightforward way to go and plug your data into them. In particular, let's see if we can get this done. I'm trying to load our Flow Designer application. Here it is. And Flow Designer is really our web-based tool that's accessible to a lot broader list of people that allows you to pump data from one place to another. In this case, we're taking data from our Product Finder API and pumping it into Google Merchant and showing you how this mapping is actually done. Here's a particular one. I won't have time to actually go into any detail here, but it's pretty straightforward to pull together all the data that Google needs in order to actually execute. Okay. And with that in mind, we can ask ourselves, what have we actually built here? How does this actually all work? So again, we've got our product finder. We brought in Google into the application network, and then we started to plug it in. We've got an application to push to Google. But what's particularly interesting is that each one of these applications, like this one that pushes to Google, is not actually a black box for us. It's part of the graph as well. If you look inside, and we can now look inside because this isn't code. This is Mule components, well-defined, predefined Mule components that are configured in particular ways. You can actually see the wiring diagram inside of that. You can see exactly the message processors. You can see how the data changes itself. So now you can actually start to trace end-to-end how data is flowing through these nodes, not just across the links, but also through the nodes. And you can start to come up with really a wiring diagram, as Ross mentioned before, for the entire enterprise in great detail. See exactly where particular pieces of data are flowing. And that has all sorts of interesting implications. Now, one of the most interesting ones is to point out, is to do impact analysis, is to figure out what are your points of failure before they actually fail. Let's see how that actually works. So let's actually keep going with Google, right? To do that, we're going to do another search in Google. And this time, I'm going to look for tents in Berkeley. And the reason I'm doing that is because I live in Berkeley. And it's particularly interesting for me to go and explore who's available to help me with tents over there. Now, this is pretty interesting because, again, it has some interesting metadata. But could we even do better than this, right? Could Google really, truly understand me through the eyes of the retailers and ask interesting other information? So for example, I think it would be very interesting if we had an API that started to help me categorize tents. You know, there's lightweight tents and there's heavy tents, and actually help me shop. And there are APIs starting to emerge that do that. Another example, how about something that, oh, here's the API designed for that. How about something that actually helped me classify myself? You know, I'm the type of guy who likes to invest in a well-made tent and keep it for a long time. Other people are looking for family kind of tent. So in this case, I've actually added an API endpoint to buying styles so the consumer can start to tell you, this is the kind of consumer that I am. And so with all of this rich information, you would think that you can just implement this. Here we go. You would think that you can just implement this and pump all that data to Google, and Google would accept it happily and hopefully change the experience accordingly. So here is the adjusted one. In this case, I'm going to get the broad classifications, I'm going to get the buying styles, and I'm going to just pump that to Google, right? And everything should work. Let's see if it actually does. Well, what have I done here? I'm going to use the application network in the TOPOGRAPH to tell me whether this thing will actually work. So I've added the categorizer, and I've added the taste analysis from the customer API. And now the question is, once I add all of these things, I can get the data just fine, but will Google actually accept it? Will this integration actually run? And the answer is, it will not, and the TOPOGRAPH tells me that. Because the TOPOGRAPH says that Google has a very strict API on the kind of information that it gets, and I know exactly what kind of information I'll now be giving it, and that kind of failure can be pointed out at design time. So you can realize what's going on before it actually happens. And this is a pretty broad capability. Okay, but this is a demo. So we get to pretend as if Google did actually accept those kinds of fields, and see what that would look like. Great. Let's go do that. Now, before I actually do that, let's talk a little bit about the ability to actually engage with consumers in a more meaningful way. So we saw that these extra fields are pretty important for that kind of engagement. The question is, how am I going to get all of that engagement happening in an ongoing way, right? Not just as kind of a one-time thing. Okay, and to do that, I need to reload something here on the demo. Okay, so in order for me to get that meaningful engagement, I'm going to actually end up pulling in a CRM system. And the reason I want to show you this is because on one side, I want Google to allow all of that interaction. On the other side, I also want to have a CRM system that allows someone on the other side to engage with that consumer and keep that happening. So I'm going to pull in a CRM system. I've chosen Salesforce, not surprisingly. It's a pretty good choice to pull in at this point. And I'm going to expose a particularly friendly API for customers. And then I'm going to pull in the merchandising and the bundling to get that sales associate the full visibility on what they should be doing. And I'm going to pull in the ordering as well so that that sales associate can help the customer with the actual ordering. And finally, I'm going to be able to ask the TOPOGRAPH for all the data that's available to supply to Salesforce. Because again, the TOPOGRAPH knows about all the kinds of data available through those APIs. And there's something really cool that we're building on top of this, which again is related to what Tim Berners-Lee will say tomorrow. And that is that because somebody has spent a lot of time defining for you the various fields that are very easy to consume on each one of these systems, you can take the data of those systems, reflect it through those simple APIs, and start to regard all of those systems as if they were just simple tables in a distributed database. And that's really the vision of the semantic web, the ability to query all the data across your information, unlock it from its silos, blend it together, and bring it back to you. And that's the API query project that we're incubating right now. Okay, so with that in mind, let's actually see how that interacts. And hopefully the demo gods are playing well today. Okay, so here on the left, you see pretty much the same Google Search UI that we saw before, the same search request that went in. But I've tweaked it a little bit to show you the kind of user interface and engagement that Google could offer if we were pumping it the data that we saw before. And on the right here, we see the user interface that a sales associate sitting inside of a store, sports basement say, would see on her iPad. And this is the Salesforce UI that she would use to engage, understand, and interact with the customers. So let's start here on the left. In addition to the regular filters that you can see on Google today, what I've added here is a couple of filters that reflect the data that we were pumping into Google. For example, if someone is searching for a tent, what are the categories to help them filter down the kinds of tents that they're looking for? What are the ways for them to tell the retailers, this is the kind of shopper that I am, to have a more intentional and more specific kind of engagement with them. So with that extra information, the retailers can engage better. But the best way to engage, of course, is with the experts actually sitting inside of these retail stores. And so here we can see that, for example, in Sports Basement in Berkeley, there's a sales associate by the name of Janet who's standing by, ready to engage me as a person who's shopping for tents. Now, we happen to have Janet here on stage with us in our reconstructed retail store. But remember, she's supposed to be in Berkeley right now inside of this store interacting with me online. So let's go ahead and see what happens when I, as a consumer, click into this and engage with Janet. And sure enough, what I see here is the same kind of interaction that I had with the bot. But in this case, I'm going to end up actually interacting with Janet. Now, this is a person actually sitting inside of our store here. But we're interacting online. So the way that this will work is, I'm going to show you here the interface that she's seeing on her iPad, but to make it easier for you to see it, I'm just going to show you here on my screen. Looking through this Salesforce UI, you can see all this extra information about the customer. She can see how much I've spent before. She can see all of my history, how many loyalty points I have, the last purchase that I made, the kinds of things that I tend to buy, and so on. Janet can also look at my past order history. This is the same view that the bot was using in order to engage me online. Under Profile, she can actually see the same information that we were pumping also to Google. So she can see the self-characterizations. She can also see a little bit of the location that was fished out of my conversation with the bot, the fact that I work in San Francisco, the fact that I live in Berkeley, and so on, the types of things that I buy, and a little bit of insight as far as what products to go ahead and merchandise for me. And then finally, a little bit of the timeline of what's happened so far so she can always reconstruct the context. And when she opens up the chat window, she can actually see exactly the kind of interactions that we're seeing here, but this time, of course, from her perspective. So as soon as I reach out to engage with Janet, she basically can introduce herself and send that. And at that point, notice that I've automatically switched on the left here to be interacting with Janet, an actual person sitting inside of the store. And so I'll engage with her and type something in. So in this case, I'm looking for pop-up tents. Now she's an expert in this category, and so she knows exactly what I'm talking about, and she can respond appropriately. So basically, she gives me a little bit of her experience, and she uses the opportunity to actually try to engage me in a conversation around tents and some special discounts that she can make for me. And inside of her insights view, remember there are the specific categories, in this case that Einstein has recommended that she merchandise to me. And so she can actually push that by engaging in, by clicking in just the right control here. She can push a particular tent to me in the chat. Here it is. She can recommend another tent for me. Here's that one. And I can look at that on my side and start to figure out, okay, am I interested in any of these? So in this case, I'm actually indicating I'd like to actually see them. We go back here on her side. And she will respond to me based on the location information that she already had and draw me into the store. Okay? So what do I say? Giving her a little bit more information in our conversation and starting to talk to her about what I'm actually aiming for. Now, this is actually a great opportunity for her to raise the conversation to not just be about a specific tent, but really about a higher level goal or outcome that I want to have, which is around a camping expedition or a camping trip. So let's look at that for 1 second. If retailers can align with consumers on outcomes, on something much bigger than just the immediate transaction, the rewards are much, much bigger. Now, to do that, we need an outcome tracking system. And to tell you the truth, when we were building this demo, we couldn't find one out there. But I think this is a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs to actually lean into this and give systems for retailers to swarm around consumers when they figure out that there's some outcome. So we've obviously mocked together an outcome system. We've plugged it in here. And let's see what the actual outcome of that is. Well, the outcome of the outcome system is that now different retailers can come together and hook up their application networks together and start to partner, in many cases inadvertently, with the consumer on trying to make their wedding happen, trying to have their son's birthday party happen, trying to make a camping trip happen, a much bigger outcome than just a simple transaction. Okay, so with that in mind, let's try to actually illustrate that a little bit. So here in the Outcomes tab, we can see the user interface of that outcome system. And based upon the last information that Janet saw, in this case a camping trip, she can launch a search for what should she do when somebody's looking to do a camping trip as an outcome. And you can see the matching outcomes. In this case, it's tent and camping. And I can ask, or she can ask me the various questions. So she knows to ask where are you going and where are you going and how many people are in your group and any kids in the group and so on. And so in this case, Russian River is what she managed to see. This is in 2 weeks. There are 3 people and 1 son in this thing. And she can go ahead and create that outcome in the outcome system. And the result of that is a standard checklist for this kind of outcome that she can then go ahead and push to the consumer. So when she does that, that actually becomes a very useful checklist for that consumer to partner with her and actually with other retailers in order to align on that mission of getting a very successful camping trip. And when that happens, these various other retailers can start to engage and help her achieve, or help me in this case, achieve that outcome. So for example, here is a particular item that was pushed by a retailer around rafting trips. And there's another retailer that can push something into here, in this case around kids' entertainment and so on. And so what we're really seeing is that a network of retailers has now put together their application networks in order to try to align with the consumer who's trying to do now a bigger outcome, a camping trip, to make that consumer successful and of course to have a much more meaningful engagement with that consumer. Okay, moving on. So we're starting to see the power that's actually in the brick and mortar system. It isn't just about the stores, it's also about the people that are living inside of those stores. And in order to leverage that power, you've got to actually lean into it. You got to do something with all that distribution. If you don't, that distribution will actually be used against you for something that's called showrooming, right? Which is where consumers go in and they use your investments, but then they end up buying online from someone else. So let's see what that actually looks like. And for this next part, we've got a bit of a showroom to show you right here. So what is this? This is actually a typical kind of store. It looks like a very conventional kind of furniture display. Somebody's taken time to arrange all of that furniture, but there's nothing particularly personalized about it, right? So I have to go in and in my mind map that to my actual needs. So here we have a typical page that you might see online when you're entering the storefront, the online storefront of a furniture retailer. You see furniture nicely laid out in a particular setting, but this setting is of course generic. It's the setting of that you would see for anybody who walks into that online store. What you, however, as a consumer are trying to do is to figure out what furniture to place in your own living room or bedroom or your son's room in order to redecorate that specific one. Now, you can already find online a variety of offerings, like this one from IKEA, that allow you to take virtual furniture from IKEA and place it in the context of your own room. And that's really useful. It gives you the right context. But many of us actually like to go into a furniture store to really feel what furniture looks like in reality. And that's very important for the retailer. It's a lot of their value add. And so the technology is there today to actually enable that kind of experience. Here's an example of an app that allows you to capture everything about your room very easily from your phone and capture not only the pictures but also the measurements and the physical layout of your room. So we should be able to actually pull that into a physical showroom and customize the showroom on the fly to exactly what your room will look like. And then when we've done that, we can then again pull together a variety of retailers to try to achieve the ultimate outcome you're looking for. Not just to buy, say, a bed or a table, but maybe you also need to change the paint color or choose some art, and in general, achieve the outcome of, say, redecorating your son's room. So let's see how that actually works. Let's say that I took a picture of our son's bedroom and brought this into the store, and it would end up looking a little bit more like this. right? So it's a little bit more realistic for me. I can go into the store and actually adjust the furniture, figure out where things should be placed. But I don't know about you, I'm a terrible room designer. I'm really bad at this kind of thing. But there's a lot of people in my social network that are really good at it. So wouldn't it be cool if I could actually walk into a retailer and bring a whole bunch of retailers, other retailers, to help me with paint colors and to help me with art that matches the furniture that I'll be buying, and bring in all of my friends at the same time to help me actually choose which combinations make sense. So of course, that's exactly what we've done. And what I would invite you to do at this point is to go to this URL on your phone, on your laptop. Just open that URL up, and we're going to play a little bit of a game. So there's 3 choices of paint color and 3 choices of art. So I'm going to unblock this anyway, and if you guys want to keep clicking, feel free. We'll keep the game going on this side, and then we're going to actually start to go into the store here in just a second. All right, so you can see your votes. You can see the last people. We've got 88 people. Unfortunately, we don't have time to keep running this through, and we'll transition to our next store. And so to do that, I'm going to go pretty fast here. I'm going to pretty much skip a lot of this thing, because really what we've done is we've said, OK, this is a good beginning, but we can take this to another level, right? So we can add a lot more systems to physical stores to turn them into very, very rich experiences. We can add RFID detectors. We can add all sorts of ways of presenting you with inventory that's in the store and that's not. And that's actually what I wanted to go show you next. All right, so with that in mind, we're going to walk over to our other store here.
Are they bringing that
And
out?
in this store, what you're seeing is all of these items are sitting on shelves populated by very smart labels. And these labels understand exactly what item is on each shelf, and with a digital capability of presenting exactly the right stuff for that. But there's another piece that we actually put into here, which is the ability to recognize customers. And so I can walk up to this and start to have my face detected. And as soon as it actually detects me, it's going to start to do something quite interesting.
Good morning, Uri. Great to see you in our Berkeley store. We have some discounts for you for your camping trip.
All right, so how did she know all of that, right? She recognized me, she went back into CRM, she pulled all that information together, she realized where I was in my shopping experience and what I'd committed to do when I came down to see the Sports Basement store actually in Berkeley. And all of the right items have all the right information. And at this point, she also realizes I need to talk to someone.
I know Janet has been eager to show you some tents. Let me call her.
Awesome.
Uri,
Hello.
so nice to finally
Nice to
get
see
to
you
meet
again.
you in person. Okay, so I know we just have a limited amount of time, but I want to get you on your way.
Great.
So we've got your tents, we've got your water shoes, and then I also figured you'd want a lantern for the Russian River.
Yeah, so you know, it's true. I kind of like this lantern. Is this a reasonable one for me to
I
take?
think it's a great fit. That's the one I personally use.
Okay, I'll take it.
Yeah, please do. You can actually pick it up.
I'm
Check
sure
it
I
out.
can. But what happens when I pick it up?
So when you pick it up, you're going to see that the item is already in your shopping cart, and when you actually leave the store, it will automatically charge you.
That's awesome.
And no more waiting in lines.
Wow, okay,
Right?
so no friction. And in fact, these water shoes look pretty good too.
Yeah,
Maybe I
don't
should
try
grab
and
those
game
too.
this.
Maybe I should put the cart back, the lantern back, but look, it actually knows. And in fact, it realizes that I get a discount on that. That's really cool. All right, so all of this is reacting really well, but we're not done. Because remember, I came in here to buy a tent, Janet.
You did. I
And
did not
so-
forget.
Which tent would you say I should go for?
So, you know, we've got this camo one over here. We have the Coleman over here. Which one do you like?
You know, these are okay, but I don't know about this drab green. I'd like something a lot more colorful.
Well,
that seems better.
You know what? We actually have some extra inventory. Let me show you what we have in the back.
Okay.
I think it's going to be just the fit for you.
Huh, the Outlands Explorer tent. What's that?
Oh, just
Oh, that's
wait.
pretty cool. Okay. I get that. That's the kind of tent that I actually was looking for. I get that you don't have it in inventory, that's fine, but that's actually exactly the tent that I wanted.
All right,
How?
so you're more of a colorful person. I totally agree.
You knew that.
All right, so what we can actually do is we have it in stock in our San Francisco store, so we can get it to your Berkeley house this afternoon.
What do you mean this afternoon? How is
Yeah,
it
so
going to
I
get to my house
actually already
this
have
afternoon?
it on the way.
Really?
It is.
Oh, it's purchased and it's on its way and it's coming. It's literally coming. So the drone knows where I am, it knows where I live, it knows what I've ordered, and here comes the tent. Awesome. Success. I actually have a tent. It's a little on the small side, but you know, it's a demo. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Uri. Glad you could shop here.
All right. Awesome. Some things are working. So with that in mind, let's bring this to a conclusion. Let's very quickly realize what it is that we've done. One thing is, we've reused pieces of the demo from last year. So if you remember, if you were here a year ago, we had face recognition. We took that same system and we're able to repurpose this year to be able to recognize me, because I was in the system last year as well. Okay, and with that in mind, let's recall the issues that we're facing. So as a retailer, right, the battle really is one for composability. The faster you can become composable, the more building blocks you can create for yourself, the faster you can actually start to compete, right? In terms of technology, even if you have legacy technology, you can mix and blend it with new technology as long as you become composable, as long as you expose it in individual pieces. You get your breadth not by trying to be as big as Amazon, but by trying to be part of an army that together is as big as it can get, and truly a worldwide network of retailers. You need to partner with your customers on outcomes. Yes, you can try to find out all the information about them, but the most important information is what are they actually trying to do? And if you can partner with your customers, we see this in the enterprise world, it works at least as well in the consumer world, you'll be able to have a much more meaningful ongoing engagement with your customers. And finally, if you really leverage into your assets, if you really combine the online world and the offline world and make it all work together seamlessly, that is an incredible asset. And if you actually literally just count the number of retail outlets and the number of people working at them, it's unbeatable. So there is absolutely hope. Now, what happens at the end of this is I think the economy itself will end up changing, because when consumers get used to this kind of experience, when things just get to them, when retailers are helping them to achieve outcomes, they're never going to want to go back. Just like it's changing banking, just like it's changing transportation. That new economy, something called the coherence economy, is when all of these capabilities, all these building blocks, naturally align to the needs of every consumer. And in the end, the thing that makes an economic revolution actually happen is not when it's technically possible, but when it's practical. And hopefully, today and tomorrow, you'll see how it's very practical for you to actually create coherent experiences for your customers. And with that, I'd like to again welcome you to Connect. Say thank you to this wonderful team that built this demo over the last couple of months. All the mistakes were certainly mine. And have fun at Connect. Thank you.